So you can go ahead and you can unmute if you wish to participate. But so we have Psalm 10 and Psalm 11 is what we're going to kind of go at today. And so the first, so we can kind of, I thought we would, in with Psalm 10, it has really a classic kind of structure to it. And so what would be like in a sense, as you kind of encounter this psalm, what's the first part of the psalm? What's kind of the first, what gets the psalm going? It's the classic psalm of lament. So what's kind of the first thing that kind of the psalmist starts with?
A question of why are you not with me?
Right. It's I call it the provocation, right? So the provocation is that the Psalms of Lament typically start with a problem, right? That's that provokes the psalmist to compose the song. And here the provocation is, yes, why? And that's a pretty good provocation, isn't it? I mean, I think that's really if what is the fundamental human question of God? And I think why is right up there. And it doesn't matter what the why is too. It's just, why, God? Why is this happening? Why do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? Which is, in many ways, I think one of the greatest fears of the faithful. That the fundamental test of the faithful is when we feel as if God has hidden himself from us. Right? It's kind of the human heart says to God, hey, golly, I'm trying to do my part here. And, where are you? Do you have my back? Are you in my corner? So there's the provocation is with the seeming distance of God. So that's what sets the whole psalm up. And so then we have in a sense the next section would be a description of the problem. Right? So we have the provocation, then we have a description and some detail of the problem. So what is the problem? Has it described? So, in terms of the why, what's causing the why to get asked?
Because it looks like those who are not with God or those who are evil are prospering.
Right. Good. Yeah. So exactly. So what are some of the ways in which that happens? Or, what is particularly galling to the psalmist?
That the wicked do anything they want because they think there's no God, so they don't have to worry about any consequences.
Yes,
and they seem to get away with it.
They sure do, don't they? Oh, I mean, this is purely historical, of course. No, yes, it sure does seem like the wicked get away with it. And you have that classic description of the psalmist of the wicked, that in a sense, in the pride, number one, that's very bad. Pride, bad, wicked. In verse 4, the pride of their countenance, the wicked say, God will not seek it out. All their thoughts are, there is no God. And one of the reasons why, in a sense, that's so galling to the psalmist or so threatening is because that's the very question that the psalmist is asking himself. I mean, in a sense, they are acting as if the worst fears of the psalmist are true. The worst fear of the psalmist is that God really isn't there, that God really is far away, that God really won't help. And here you have the wicked acting as if, for all intents and purposes, that's actually the case. So that's one ground upon which, kind of perversely, the faithful in their doubt share that common ground with the wicked in their certainty. The wicked in their certainty, there is no God. The faith in their doubt, what if there's no God? Mm-hmm. And it's that common ground is, in some ways, between the wicked and the faithful, is the scariest ground upon which we're called to fight our spiritual battles. But that's the ground upon which the psalmist finds himself. So what are some other ways in which the wicked are up to no good? What are some other parts of the script? At least, what are some parts of the description of the wicked that really kind of jumped out for you or spoke to you powerfully?
They boast.
I'm sorry, they boast, right? They brag.
In 3, they boast for the desires of he boasts for the desires of his soul.
Mm-hmm. Right, good. So instead of, and so the boasting of the wicked is offensive, not only because they're wicked and they're boasting about doing bad things, but in some ways the boasting of the wicked is a perverse parody of the praise of the righteous. In a sense, the issue is speech. And so in a sense, what is particularly, again, challenging or threatening is that the wicked boast or kind of speak out loud about their own wicked deeds. And so there are two problems there: their own, right? And then the wicked deeds, so it's like, it's the things they do on their own strength versus not only is it on their own strength and not God, but it's also they're bad. As opposed to, has kind of a mirror image in evil of the praise offered by the righteous to God for what God has done. And so, yeah, the boasting of the wicked is that sort of, again, diabolical parody of the true speech of the righteous. Good. What else, Charmaine?
It's rewarded.
It seems to be rewarded. That's right. It sure does seem to be and they get ahead in life. Their ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are on high, and that on high here doesn't mean powerful. It's another way of saying far away, right? It's like, kind of in that cloudy mountain, up, removed from us mere mortals down below. On high, heaven, where, it's almost like the psalmist accuses God of, well, it's all well and good for you to be righteous up there in heaven, but those of us down here are having a hell of a time. So I'm for your it's fine for you to have all your judgments if they all stay up there with you. We need them to kind of come down into our lives, right? So the judgments of God are way up there in heaven and aren't making connection. In some ways, this is part of the force of the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Right? That's where we need God's will. It's right here on earth. God's doing fine in heaven. We need God's will done right here on earth, right? So, yes, their judgments are on high, out of their sight. It's for their foes; they scoff at them, and then they think of their heart. We shall not be moved. Throughout all generations, we shall not meet adversity. And then, again, that's one of the grounds of pride, or the special species of pride of the wicked, is that they think they're going to be around forever. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, the righteous, because their sense of self is conditioned by an awareness of their creatureliness before their creator God, they get that they are but mortal, right? In the Psalms, the righteous, we're but mortals. We're but a passing breath. We're like the flower fades and then it withers. The righteous are quite aware of their mortality. If only the wicked were also as aware, but no, they seem to think that they're going to be in charge forever and ever. No term limits for the wicked, right? That's, they seem to think that they're going to be there all the time. And again, we see this borne out in history, right? I mean, it's like the 1,000-year Reich. It's like the idea that we're going to be large and in charge forever and ever after. And there's nothing that you little people can ever do about it, because we've got all the power that we need to make sure that happens. Randy, what about you?
Well, that's bad, but how about killing the people?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So, I like it. It's like, so Randy gets down to brass tacks.
God, but killing the innocents and hiding and ambushing them in the village seems pretty rough.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty practical. That's practical evil, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
it's like, it's one thing to be proud and to be talking a big game, but then, of course, you're actually following through and killing the innocent. Exactly. That's
The first two were just just almost differences of opinion, right? What's okay, but that other one's not.
Yes,
That's pretty rough.
that's right.
That's a question people ask today. Why do we have all this evil going on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So they're compared to the alpha predator of that part of the Mediterranean and the alpha predator of the wilderness, the lion. And so, like, they are like a lion in a covert, basically, where the lion is kind of waiting there in this little, in the brush, waiting to pounce on people just trying to go about their business. They lurk so they may seize the poor, and particularly the poor. Right now, again, the poor are those in the Psalms, and I've said this in a sermon, I think, too, that in the Psalms, the poor are not just like, it's not only economic. It's not necessarily an economically restricted category. In the Psalms, the poor are all those without power in the face of the wicked. Right? And it says the poor are those who are vulnerable to the predations of the powerful. And so the rich in the Psalms, likewise, are not in a sense, it says, like, for example, it's not about money per se, because the psalmist will say the just lend money, the just are willing to, support the poor. And so there's this idea that the just man who lives in accordance with God's will is going to be blessed with prosperity. So there is a little bit of prosperity psalmody in there. But the idea is that the just man uses his prosperity to be a blessing to the poor and lend freely. And so the rich, therefore, are those who use their material prosperity in order to oppress and gain power over others. Right? So it's not to be rich in the Psalms, and to a certain extent the Gospels, because the Gospels are relying again on the psalmic witness. Right? They're not. Jesus isn't just talking about rich and poor in a vacuum, as if he's read, as if he's read Karl Marx. So, that's not, so Jesus's reference for rich and poor are the Psalms. And the psalmist's witness is, again, being rich has to do with how you use your material abundance in order to commit oppression against the poor, who are those who find themselves vulnerable to that. So again, the wicked then are like these lions that drag away those who are vulnerable, and they seize them and drag them off in their nets. And so a little bit of mixing of metaphor there between a lion and a human hunter. But basically, do you go about the wicked go about their lives as predators. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you look at nature, predators exist at a ratio of about 1 to 20 to their prey. I read that somewhere, that basically if you count up the predators, the predator animals on the African plains versus all the antelopes and everything, it's about the numbers are about 5%. It takes about 20 animals typically for their predator to do well. So, it's kind of the top 5%, if you will, the most wicked 5% that are preying upon, the everyday people who are just trying to kind of do life. Yes, Jennifer.
In verse 11, okay, so in verse 10, it says the helpless are crushed by those predators and sink and fall by his might. And then in 11 it says, he says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. Is that the helpless saying that, or is that the wicked ones saying that?
That's the wicked. That's the wicked. So, my translation says, they stoop, they crouch, the helpless fall, they think in their heart. So in my translation, in the NRSV, it brings out the parallel between the action of the wicked versus their attitude. And they think God has forgotten, and then the implied, what has God forgotten? He has forgotten the afflicted and the poor. He's forgotten to care about them, which is, again, the provocation that the psalm starts out with. So I'm just kind of looking around at people who are unmuted. Scott, you've unmuted yourself. What are you?
Damn. No, I at least in my translation, in 8 and 9, it's in 3 places that they're ambushing too.
Yes.
So there's a sneakiness, there's a surprise. There's even they're not even straight up being bullies. You know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Really an unfairness about it.
Right. That's right. Indeed. So it's kind of a premeditation, which again, that's what's in the background of the 10th commandment of the Big Ten. It's not a football conference; it's a set of commandments. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, his goods, etc., etc. And the word for covet, it goes beyond just merely say, that looks nice. To covet is in the word in Hebrew means, in a sense, to scheme or to plot towards actually getting it. Right? It's very much kind of to lay an ambush for it. It's like it's much more, and it's in a sense Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is the one who radically interiorizes that. In a sense, Jesus, it's like if you even look at a woman lustfully in your heart, you've already committed adultery. So Jesus, in a sense, takes that 10th commandment and says, well, I mean, it's not enough, not just to not plan for something, right? It's what God wants is for you not to actually want to do it, in the first place. So Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, again, radicalizes, but the Hebrew, the Semitic, I should say, the Semitic sensibility is very material. It's very kind of brass tacks, kind of like, are you making plans to try to do it? Because, trying to accomplish, trying to do evil is what really is bad. Yes, the wicked rationalize their injustice. In verse 11, at the end, it says that by interpreting God's perceived absence has permission. That's the fundamental. And the psalmist is trying to figure out, what does God's absence mean? What does God's hiddenness mean? And the wicked will volunteer an answer right away. The wicked will tell you exactly what God's absence is like. Well, that's because either he doesn't exist or he doesn't care. Those are their 2 answers. Either way, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're gonna live large at other people's expense. And so that's the challenge. The moral challenge to the righteous is, how do we respond in faithfulness to this threat? So that's the profiles, like kind of profiles of wickedness. Versus, Psalm 10 verses 3 through 13. And then you have, it's just kind of a transitional section of 12 and 13. right? So a little transition where there's a petition. Now we're kind of inching our way forward. So rise up, O Lord. O God, lift up your hand. Do not forget. Right? So it says that, you know, it says the wicked think in their heart, God is forgotten. And the psalmist basically says, Lord, don't forget, you know, don't prove them right. You know, they're mocking you. You need to take, you know, in a sense, it's a request for God. It's a petition that God attend to his reputation. Don't let the wicked set your reputation. You need to come out here and get it done for us. And then a restatement of the why question. So in the art of the song, in a sense, it's going to kind of conclude this section with this transition that responds to what the wicked are saying in their hearts. God has forgotten the poor, and then with a reflection of another why. Why do the wicked renounce God and say in their hearts, "You will not call us to account"? So it's now that why, again, with the psalmist, and this is something that we should appreciate. Which for the psalmist, this is not a philosophical, theological explanation of the presence of evil in God's creation. This is, why for the psalmist is an accusation, just like it is for us. If you were to ask somebody, why are you doing what you are doing? It's not necessarily help me understand why it is you're doing what you're doing. That's a different way to ask a question, isn't it? Like, help me understand. I am here to listen to your explanation of your behavior. It's why are you doing why are you doing what you're doing? And so the refreshing testimony in many ways of the Hebrew scriptures, of the Semitic witness of faith, is that they are willing to challenge God in some ways like the wicked, but in a different kind of way. That is, they challenge God with an accusation. It's like, what gives? Come on, be God. We believe in you. Go be you. That's what we want from you. And we're not doing it. We're not asking you to do anything you already haven't said you want to do. So go do that. And evidently, God seems to tolerate that sort of questioning. That's another interesting thing about the Hebrew Bible is God is willing to tolerate people who debate with him, like Abraham, right? Surely God, you wouldn't destroy a city over just 10. I mean, come on, surely you wouldn't let 10 people stand in the way of mercy, right? That the God that Israel knows is a God who is wrestled with. And that's part of that story of Jacob wrestling with the angel and getting named Israel. Is the name Israel means to contend, to struggle, to wrestle. And so God's people, Israel, are those who wrestle with God, who contend with God, who fight God, if you will. And it says they grasp onto him. It's like, we're not going to let you go. And that's Jacob's word, right? So the angel says, you have to let me go. And Jacob says, I will not let you go. And that's Israel's faith. Israel's faith is, you know what? We don't understand this. We don't understand why the wicked seem to prosper. We don't understand why we suffer, but we're not going to let you go. Instead, we're going to demand an answer from you. And God responds. That's the thing. So this is the faith of Israel. So in verse 14, we have the turn, right? That's where the poem makes the turn. Like any good poem, you've got it. You set up a situation and then you have a turn. And of course, it's the contrastive but you do see. That's the turn of the poem, where accusation becomes affirmation of faith, right? That's where the psalm has this power, is that it moves from accusations against God to affirmations of God and his goodness. But you do see. So in that turn, what are some of the things that kind of in that final section of the psalm structurally, the what kind of jumps out at you all has most powerful for you?
Break the wicked
Yes.
evildoer.
That's right. Break that sword arm of theirs so they can't throw that net. Yes. And seek out their wickedness until you find none. There's one of my favorite scenes of a very flawed movie, which would be The Last Temptation of Christ, the Martin Scorsese version, right? Of course, the novel's better, but the Scorsese version. Very troubled film. But anyhow, one of the really good parts of it, I think, is the confrontation between Jesus and Zebedee, and where Zebedee, the father of James and John, and they're in the middle of stoning Mary Magdalene, and they dragged her literally kind of by the hair out into the village, and it really does. So many movies kind of portray this in such a very sanitized way, but the Scorsese, I think, does a really good job of really showing that this is what village justice would look like, and she's dragged out by her hair into the middle of the village square, and people are literally picking up they're picking up stones, and so Jesus steps into the middle, and kind of astride her, and so Zebedee is he challenges Zebedee, and Zebedee basically is like, get out of, you better get out of the way or I'm going to throw it at you. And Jesus, it's almost like this presentation of kind of Jesus's Jedi powers, where Jesus says to Zebedee in just this very calm voice, "Be careful, Zebedee. Aren't you afraid that your arm will wither and lose its strength?" And as he says it, Zebedee's arm kind of falls to the, and he drops the stone that he has, and you have that image of kind of God. That's what God breaking the arm of the wicked looks like, is them simply losing the power to harm, right? That's what breaking an arm means, is that they lose the power to strike, and seek out their wickedness until you find none, like root it out. Who else? What are some other verses and images in this last section?
In verse 17, where he says, "The Lord will strengthen our hearts, and incline our ears so that justice is done." So really, we don't have control, but we have faith.
Yes.
Give us the
Right.
strength.
Exactly. And of course, when we read, "Lord, you will hear the desire of the meek," of course, the Beatitude should ring in our ears. Blessed are the meek, right? For they shall inherit the earth. You will strengthen their heart, the heart of the meek, right?
Yeah.
And you will incline your ear because they're crying out, right? The meek are, in a sense, the meek are those who, again, don't have the wherewithal to fight for themselves, however that happens, And so we tend to think of meekness as kind of this kind of a temperamental quality, right? To be meek means to kind of be mincing and somewhat cowardly, meek and mild, non-threatening. And whereas it's really, again, it's like rich and poor. To be meek is really to be someone who, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek," it's really those who are unable to accomplish justice for themselves. And so they're going to inherit from God, who will accomplish justice for them. That's the gist of that beatitude. And so here, the meek will have their heart strengthened as the Lord inclines his ear, which is a kind of a double bodily metaphor in a sense. Not only is you have it, but it's like it's actually, if you think about it, it's a very tender. It's basically like a parent who bends down to listen to what a small child is saying. To incline the ear is to bend down so that, you know, a small child can be heard. And so the meek, those who are childlike, those who are vulnerable to the strength of others, that God, while human beings see them as short in stature, kind of the Zacchaeuses of the world, right? That God overcomes that weakness, that lack of strength or stature in the world's eyes by leaning down to listen. And it's a really powerful image again of that parental care of God for those who suffer. And so that's something where, in a sense, for when we are in our hour of suffering, and that hour surely comes upon us, for some of us and many of us several times. But when we're in those hours of suffering, those 3 a.m. moments of our lives, when we feel puny, so to speak, this is something that I think a consolation for us, that God leans down to hear us. We don't have to be powerful or strong or shout to be heard by a God who listens to the children of humanity, right? And this is, I think, also part of what Jesus means when he says, unless you become like unto a child, meaning someone that, in a sense, someone so powerless that you can be dandled on the knee of an adult, right? You know, you take a small child, you can pick us, children of 4 or 5, you just pick them up like so, and set them down like so. And the fact is that there are human adults who feel like this is what the world and the powerful can do to them. It's just like, well, I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to put you down here. And so Jesus, the challenging message of Jesus is to his disciples who think we're building a revolutionary movement here. And, revolutions need strong people. They need people who can shake things up and push down the door. Jesus says, no, you don't understand. You have to be like a child who can be picked right up. And to live in that sort of vulnerability is the Jesus way. It's very challenging. We don't like that. That's a very hard word for us to hear. What else? What are some other, for other folks?
So the reference in 16, the nations perish from his land?
Right.
That's a bit confusing.
Yes. So, right. So this is so basically here, this would be kind of the traditional hope. This would be a traditional hope for the Messiah, that when the Messiah comes, the Lord will make him king. He will reign as king, and then the nations, meaning the pagans, the Gentiles, will perish from his land. Right? That was kind of the traditional job description of the Messiah was. And so this is Israel. Again, and Israel, this, like so many Psalms, they can be read on several levels. The level of the individual sufferer, but also on the level of the corporate suffering Israel, under the boot of the pagan oppressor. And you'll note that in Psalm 10 doesn't have a superscription. So what that may have meant, we're not sure, but what that may mean is it may have become later. It may, again, not come from the Davidic period, or in a sense before the exile. Anything, they may have ascribed to David anything that came before the exile. Like these were the ones we brought with us to Babylon. They came from David, right? And then the ones that don't have the superscription are the ones that kind of come along later. And in a sense, the Israelites, has a corporate prayer, even though phrased in the first person as an individual psalm of lament. These songs, we have to remember, these songs were sung by groups of people in corporate worship. So they're looking at the pagan nations, who occupy Israel, and say, that's their hope, is once the wicked, the arm of the wicked, especially, or the evildoers, specifically their sword arm is broken, then we root them out, and we destroy every single village where those filthy pagans live. The peoples, the nations, the Gentiles will perish from his, meaning the Lord's, land. Yeah.
Can I ask, is there what's the sense, this is pretty strong revolutionary language. Is there a sense that they would be punished for singing these things in a group? Or the pagans didn't understand what they were saying because it was another language?
Right. Well, it's the phrase in the future conditional, like the Lord will, it's like, oh yes, sing us those songs about what your Lord is going to do for you. That's the one thing that you can count on the wicked to do is to be arrogant, and to think that these spiritual songs of Zion, are, he sure didn't help you when you were in Jerusalem, did he? When we kicked down your gates and we threw your children off the walls of your own city. And so I think in some ways, as a suffering people, they would be able to sing these songs and, and without, in a sense, that direct retribution. But again, a lot of it is, again, they could always say, well, of course, what we're talking about are those terrible sinners in our own community. Plausible deniability.
I cheated a little bit because I looked it up on Wikipedia.
Okay, that's always dangerous, but all right.
Well, I'm not saying it, but I thought they said that the nations were going to perish. He wasn't going to kill anybody, but all the nations were going to go away, and we were all going to be under. That's not right, huh?
No, that would be a very a traditionally Christian spiritualization of the passage, right? Would be the nations has nations would perish to form one people.
All the nations, there's only going to be one, nation, and for all of us. Okay. Wow.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, then that means the Isaiah, what we call in the trade, Trito Isaiah, which is basically the last 10 chapters of Isaiah, chapters 56 through, 66. You have that vision of the people streaming to Zion, and bringing their treasures and so you do have that in late exile and the kind of the reconstruction period under the Persians, you have this hope that you do have a reformulated hope that eventually, the pagan peoples will, at least some of them, right, are going to come. But, part of the deal is they're going to stop being pagan peoples and they're going to be kind of apprentice Israelites. That's the deal, and that's, again, we see that in Paul's own mission. That's part of what was at the root of Galatians and the Jewish Christian factions that Paul was contending with all throughout his mission, was they were basing their view of Gentile Christian converts on the vision of those parts of the scriptures where, okay, well, that's fine. Gentiles can join, but they have to stop being Gentiles. They have to become ethnic Jews, and they have to be circumcised. They need to start obeying the laws of kosher. They have to do the things that we, in their reading of Isaiah, the Gentiles would do. And so that is, again, so that was very much, I think, Randy, that was very much a live hope and alive that carried into the early Christian church. And of course, St. Augustine, and I keep on talking about St. Augustine, but the spiritualization, and I think actually Erica raised the issue of, to spiritualize the evil or the enemy, is that really an honest move? Or in a sense, is that a theologically honest move? And Augustine actually based that move very firmly on a proof text, which would be Ephesians, which you all are studying, chapter 6, verse 12, where it is not against flesh and blood that we contend, but against the rulers, the authorities, the spiritual forces of wickedness, the cosmic powers that rebel against God. And so for Augustine, the way Augustine read that text, and that was his proof text for this whole move, is, well, listen, the apostle said, and actually it's a lovely part of one of his sermons on the Psalms, where he says, we must never pray against human beings. We only pray for human beings. We pray against the demonic. So he said, and St. Augustine says, we must be clear about that which we must pray for and that which we pray against. And he says, we never pray against humans. We always pray for them. We never pray for demons. We always pray against them. And that's, that's the Christian posture of prayer. So that's how Augustine thought of it, in terms of, in a sense, that for the Christian, the follower of Jesus, and also, again, taking Jesus' own teachings on the Sermon on the Mount seriously, the Christian is precluded from reading these Psalms in such a way that the enemy would be totally humanized. Since there might be human beings that do bad things, and there might be human beings that commit wicked acts, but human beings are always to be seen as made in the image of God, and therefore, in theory, recoverable. And even Augustine, would hold out, like, theoretically, we must, in a sense, stipulate to the possibility that the wicked could be wicked humans. Now, Satan, he's gone, right? But in the demons, they're gone. But wicked humans are at least formally recoverable, salvageable by grace. And again, he say, well, we don't really see it on this, and so the lack of seeing righteousness prevail, again, for the Christian, the horizon of that final judgment is pushed out to the eschaton, right? Is pushed out to the resurrection, and has the time when God will finally set things to rights, and where the punishment of the wicked is revealed. So anyway, so that's kind of how Augustine worked it, and he shaped the tradition, and of course he was working from traditions that the desert monks in Egypt had already started that sort of work in terms of their own spiritual application of the Psalms. The monks and the Hermetic monks were saying the Psalter. Some of them would say the entire Psalter every day. To give you an idea of how long that actually takes, on Spotify, I think I told some of you about how excited I was because I on Spotify I found a collection of all 150 Psalms set to music from in all different styles, from Palestrina to Eastern Orthodox to some Anglican classical settings to modern settings, blah blah blah, and that's a 15-hour, 35-minute like Spotify account. I mean, it's now again, when you put it to music, it takes longer, but it would literally be the work of a day, which is what they did. I mean, that was their daily work, was to say the entire Psalter every day. To spend 8 to 10 hours reciting the Psalter. Some people work in fields, other people say the Psalms. That's kind of. So, Scott, you're unmuted.
I am. Okay. No, I mean, this kind of gets to what one of the things I was thinking about when we started this is this psalm doesn't speak in terms of enemies, which I would think is you're talking about the Philistines, the Assyrians. This is the wicked. So
Yes.
are these our own people who have gone bad, as opposed to people who simply don't know any better? They're not, and that's fine because they're not God's people anyway.
Right. Well, yeah, and actually the Psalms and the tradition has in the Old Testament has a word for that kind of person. The person who doesn't know any better, they're called fools.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
So you have the wicked, and then you have fools. Now, of course, I talked about Venn diagrams. Now, there's a Venn diagram where wickedness and foolishness have some overlap, right? And the fool says in his heart, "There is no God." That's a line from the Psalms. And that's that's what the wicked say. So there is that overlap, but there is a special category for those who just don't have any sense. And as for the example, the Psalms that we'll get to later in the Psalter that talk about idol worship, that basically make fun of idols. It's like, he who crafted the ear, did he not hear? Does he not hear? You make these wooden things, and you think that they're going to actually see you. And so for the idolatry is for this Old Testament, idolatry is foolish, more than it's wicked. Oppressing the poor, injustice is wicked, not foolish. If you see the distinction, right? It's and so that's how they kind of parse that out in the Psalms. Both groups have major problems with God, of course, but they're different problems. Yes, good. Okay, so Psalm 11. It's a short psalm, and here I'm like my office is. You can't see this, but my office is getting dark enough I can't read my Bible. Hold on. There we go. Okay, that's better. Oh, but now I'm like, oh, there. Okay, so Jess, good. So Psalm 11 is another individual lament, but in a sense, it changes things up a little bit because it starts with the affirmation of faith. So again, that's even musicians do this. Sometimes you start your song with the end of the beginning, and it starts with "In the Lord I take refuge," right? So So this psalm actually starts with the affirmation, and that'd be very effective. With so many of the Psalms of Lament, the affirmation is at the end, and so it's an effective device, right? In poetry to begin with something unexpected, like an affirmation of faith in a lament. So, "In the Lord I take refuge," but you can't stay there because it is a lament after all. So this psalm poses a different problem. So in your sense, as you read Psalm 11, what is the problem? What's the provocation that produces the lament? And yeah, speak up, I can't hear you.
In the earlier psalm, the wicked weren't listening. Now we've got the righteous people who take refuge, and they're being asked, "Why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
What's the point?" So now they're being called on the carpet by the folks that I was complaining about in the previous psalm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. Mary?
So it looks like that we have the image of the bird. So we're let out like birds, and with God knowing that the archer is waiting with the arrow, the bow and the arrow to get us. So why are we being put in this position?
Yes. So there's one way to, it's kind of like we're in a big skeet shoot with the wicked, and we're the birds. And it's kind of like we're the clay pigeons, and it's like we know they're sitting there ready to train on us. Yeah, so good. Scott.
Oh, I was looking at verse 2 or 3 which reminds me of this things fall apart, the center cannot hold.
Right.
Wonder where he got that.
Yeah.
He
Right.
knows his Psalms.
Indeed. So yes, if the foundations are destroyed, and and kind of the foundation has that metaphor for the temple, kind of the temple metaphor for the moral order of the universe, right? These aren't just foundations of a building. It's like the foundations of our existential kind of, comprehensibility of our existential situation. Erica.
Oh, I was thinking that the writer was actually rejecting the idea of fleeing.
Right.
Yeah, isn't that right? So he's saying that we feel like we need to do because we're scared. But then how do I stand there? So he's asking God, teach me or tell me, how do I stand here and do this? Because I want but my faith in you is telling me I need to stand here, so I don't understand how I can do that.
Yes. So, right. So you have all of those things all going on, I think, and in the sense there's this awareness that the wicked are ready to pounce. And if we were to expose ourselves, right, to their power, then we'd be taken up right away, since we, and so the temptation, knowing that in a sense they're drawing a bead on us, the wicked has kind of drawn they got the arrow knocked and they're pulling back and they're getting ready. And they're again, there's that ambush idea of they're in the dark, to shoot in the dark. It's like basically they're in a dark corner. It has a sniper kind of ready to snipe somebody. And so given that reality, there are two temptations that I think are part of the provocation. One temptation is the temptation to flee. It run away. And in a sense, the psalmist is saying, but that's a non-starter, because then they get me when I flee. Right? So in the face of the power of the wicked, you can run away, but they'll probably catch you anyway. Or number two, to despair, to kind of curl up into it, like the foundations are being destroyed. What can the righteous do? That's a rhetorical question. The answer, which would be nothing. We can't do anything. Right? It's like we got to curl up in a little ball in a fetal position in the corner and just wait for death to come. So the temptation of the righteous that's being named in this psalm, which this is really a evocative psalm in many ways. It speaks to a different kind of spiritual plight, right? Is that, we're tempted to run away from our problems, or to curl up in a ball in front of our problems, right? To flee or to play dead. Those are the, it's like fight or flight is, and people say fight or flight, but also I always remind them, it's like, or you can play dead. that's another tried and true technique. It's like, maybe if I just sit still, they won't notice me. It's like, maybe they'll go get somebody else. So that's one way to deal with the problem of evil. So then you have the turn, right? So that's the predicament, that's the provocation. And then the turn is then in verse 4, right? So you have this image of the Lord and the holy temple. So what is the nature of the turn? What is the answer, if you will? How does the psalmist, basically he leaves off with verse 3 with a question. What's the answer to the question posed in verse 3?
We'll wait and let the Lord take care of it.
Yes, right. Yes, Charmaine. Excellent. The Lord is gonna, you gotta let the Lord do something about it. You gotta have the faith that the Lord will act. The Lord is in his holy temple. And so even if the foundations, in a sense, the foundations of the earth might be just being shaken, but the kind of, it's almost like the if you think of the holy temple's on pier and beam, and those piers are going down even deeper than the wicked can shake. And because it's going down into the reality that is God himself, and God is anchoring the foundations of our moral universe, and his throne is in heaven, his eyes behold, his gaze examines humankind. So the Lord has his eye on the situation. And then, in a sense, what is really, I think, in some ways challenging about this psalm is it reframes the predicament of the righteous sufferer by saying in verse 5, the Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. So there's this testing. So kind of like God tests everybody. In a sense, this is the negative formulation of Jesus's positive, saying the sun, shines on the righteous and the unrighteous. The rain falls on both fields. This is the negative formulation, which is everybody suffers. That's another way to put it. So Jesus puts it in a positive way, and the psalmist, being the psalmist, puts it in a negative formulation, which is, yeah, it's true. Everybody suffers. You're right. The rain falls on everybody. And so the Lord is testing both the righteous and the wicked. However, for the righteous, the suffering, the testing of the Lord is something that is disciplinary in the old sense of the word, right? That is his teaching. Like that the righteous, in a sense, are taught through suffering, through the test, to trust in the Lord even more deeply. However, the same suffering, when it visits the wicked, is a punishment, right? So there's and again, we moderns, where every child gets a trophy and no one is spanked. We have no idea anymore how to make the difference between disciplinary and punitive, actions on the part of the authority. So, a coach can make his players suffer, right, in order to teach them something, versus the prison warden, who makes people suffer for a different purpose. So, again, that may not be comforting to you, but that is the psalmist's perspective in this psalm. In this particular psalm, in a sense, the psalmist, and this is like, it takes some grit, really, to read the Psalms. The spirituality takes a little bit of grit. The psalmist is basically saying, okay, fine. We both suffer, the righteous and the wicked, we both suffer, but I will hang my hope on the fact that my suffering is teaching me something, and their suffering is punishing them for something. I mean, that's basically, it's like, so it's all about how, in a sense, one makes one's way through the world, is if one is making one's way through obedience or through wickedness and rebellion. The Lord's soul hates the lover of violence. It's a total rejection of the violent. On the wicked, he will rain coals of fire and sulfur. That's the image from Genesis. A scorching wind shall be the portion of the cup. The scorching wind is the sirocco. It's the desert wind that kicks up from the Arabian desert from the south and scours the hill country of Judea in those summer seasons. So it's like the sirocco will be their portion. They're basically always going to live with that hot, dry wind blowing on them. For an Israelite, that's about as close to hell as, it's like they didn't have all that brimstone stuff, but it's like, boy, they had a sirocco. It's like, boy, how would you like to live with that all year round? So that's the fate of the wicked. And for the Lord is, now in my translation it says righteous, in NRSV it says righteous, but again, I always like to NT Wright style, you always want to read that as the Lord is faithful and he loves faithful deeds. The upright shall behold his face. So the surprising ending, I talked about how we had a surprising beginning. The surprising ending is this, that not only does the Lord see humanity, right? So the vision is going that direction, right? But the surprise is that even in the midst of their suffering, the righteous will see God. The upright shall behold his face. This is echoed in the most famous sufferer of all, Job. Right? And mine own eyes shall behold the Lord, right? And I shall see it in the flesh, right? And not another. I'm going to see God. And so it's this, again, it takes some grit, but the idea is that in the righteous, the affirmation of this psalm is that the righteous one who trusts in God, even in the midst of their suffering, will be able to see God's presence in that suffering, a vision of God's presence and mercy that is denied to the wicked. And so, what can the righteous do? They can double down on trust and keep their eyes open to look for God. Because the upright will behold his face, and God loves faithful deeds. So that's kind of the gist of the psalm. Has it kind of is, again, it's a different tone, right? It's a kind of, and that's one of these, you can classify and schematize the psalms like, individual psalm of lament, individual psalm of lament. For example, on an Old Testament midterm, you could be presented with 5 different psalms, and then you would be asked to classify. This is a community psalm of praise. This is anyway. Enough of my flashbacks. But but if you really dig down into them and pay attention in a granular way to the psalm, the text itself, you discover that there is this variation of spiritual mood and message even between laments. And so that some laments are, coming at us from a different direction. And I think in some ways, each of us in our own, in a sense, temperaments and also situations can use different psalms at different seasons. And in a sense, when we're faced with the temptation to flee or to play dead morally, kind of tuck tail and run or kind of curl up in a little ball, we can read Psalm 11 and say, you know what? The Lord is bigger than this situation. I mean, that's really if I were to kind of paraphrase in colloquial English, verse 4, it's God is bigger than this situation. The Lord is in his holy temple. His throne is in heaven. He's got his eye on this. It's not like he can't see it. He can see it. So God is bigger than this situation. So I'm going to let a God who's bigger than my suffering teach me how to see him in the midst of it. Right? And this is something where you may not be in that place, and that's okay. Skip to another lament. There'll be another one with a different tone. So that's okay. This isn't and that's the beauty of the canon, is that, and really the diversity of scriptural witness, is that the Psalms present us with a true spiritual diversity. And there isn't just one right answer. And that really bothers our Southern Baptist friends. But that's okay. We'll pray for them, because we pray for everybody, right? Not against people. We'll pray for our Baptist friends who would have trouble with the idea that different Psalms are saying very different things about suffering. But that's the way it is. And the church, of course, people like St. Augustine, they knew, they know that they knew this text better than we do, for sure. And backwards, forwards, and sideways. And they knew there's a diversity of witness, and for them that was a provocation to prayer and to theological reflection. It's like, okay, I guess we need to think about this. If the answer isn't easy, or if there are multiple answers, we need to pick the best one for our current challenge. So anyway, just a permission to read the Bible and not agree with every part of it all the time. It's okay, because there'll be other parts. Now you can come back to it later, and maybe it'll make more sense then. That's the gift of the scriptures. They'll be there, don't worry.